Admiral George "Buck" Stanton stood on the bridge of the US Apollo, watching as the distant star system of Epsilon 5 blinked on his tactical display. The human fleet, a ragtag collection of ships built in the aftermath of Earth's fractured space programs, was still reeling from the shock of their first interstellar contact with the consortium. Epsilon 5 had been designated as a neutral zone, a crossroads of galactic trade. The consortium, a collective of some of the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, had offered humanity trade access, cautious diplomacy. But Stanton was skeptical. Humanity's first contact with alien life had already been marred by the mysterious disappearance of a deep space probe near the Zogor system. It was only a matter of time before Earth became a target, or a tool, of these far-flung powers. The moment of peace was shattered when a consortium warship, vast and incomprehensibly advanced, suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The Valtharan, a sleek, silver craft that was 30 times the size of Earth's largest battleships, loomed ominously above the Apollo. Before Stanton could issue orders, the alien ship broadcast a command: "Terran vessel, cease all operations and prepare to be boarded." A tense silence filled the bridge. Stanton's gut churned. Something wasn't right. He'd learned enough about the consortium's protocols in the briefings. They didn't board ships without cause. This felt like a prelude to something far more dangerous. His fingers hovered over the controls. The Apollo had barely enough firepower to make a dent in the Valtharan's shields, but there was no choice. "Fire!" Stanton barked. The Apollo's energy cannons fired in a brilliant flash, but the alien ship barely flinched. Instead, the Valtharan retaliated, its weapons igniting with a surge of energy that cracked open the Apollo's hull. Stanton watched in disbelief as his crew scrambled to respond. Yet in that instant, as explosions rocked the ship and systems failed, Stanton made a decision that would change the course of human history. This was no diplomatic misunderstanding. The consortium had come for Earth, and they would learn just how far humanity would go to survive. The war had begun. The attack on Earth came faster than anyone had anticipated. Within weeks of the skirmish at Epsilon 5, the consortium launched a full-scale invasion. Massive fleets, each composed of alien ships that dwarfed human technology, descended upon Earth's orbit. The initial bombardment was merciless. Satellites and communication relays were destroyed, military bases reduced to ash, and entire cities wiped off the map. The consortium's forces moved with frightening efficiency, confident that humanity, unprepared for such a swift assault, would collapse under their superior might. But the consortium had miscalculated one crucial factor: humanity's tenacity. As Earth burned, a handful of resistance cells, led by the surviving commanders of Earth's scattered fleets, began to fight back. The initial human response was chaotic, a hasty scramble to launch counterattacks, but the very chaos of the response was what kept the consortium off balance. Unlike the disciplined, top-down command structure of the alien fleets, human forces were decentralized and unpredictable. And that, as the consortium would soon discover, was humanity's greatest strength. Admiral Buck Stanton, wounded and barely escaping the wreckage of the Apollo, quickly regrouped with his closest officers at a secret military base in the Rocky Mountains. The situation was dire, but Stanton was a fighter. He'd always believed in the underdog. He wasn't about to let Earth fall without a fight. He began organizing the remnants of Earth's military into guerrilla units, directing them to hit consortium supply lines, sabotage alien ships, and most importantly, survive. For Stanton, the goal was simple: buy time, stay alive, and make sure Earth wasn't the first and last human world the consortium would ever see. Meanwhile, Back at the heart of human resistance, Emily Carson, a brilliant scientist and former MIT professor, spearheaded an operation to reverse engineer the wreckage of the Valtharan warship. She had already begun to understand the consortium's advanced technology and saw one crucial weakness: human ingenuity. Carson's team worked relentlessly, reconstructing alien components at an astonishing pace. Soon, the first human-designed quantum disruptor weapons came online, capable of disabling the consortium's energy shields and leaving their fleets vulnerable. As the first shot was fired from a human fighter that pierced the alien defenses, a spark of hope ignited across the planet. The war was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. Humanity had learned one invaluable lesson: they could fight back. By 2156, the human resistance had grown from a handful of ragtag militias to a formidable force capable of striking fear into the heart of the consortium. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival was now a relentless campaign to drive the invaders from Earth and its colonies. The consortium, stunned by humanity's unexpected ability to adapt, retaliated with renewed ferocity. They deployed the Zerho, an insectoid species known for their brutal swarming tactics and hive-mind coordination. The Zerho were a terrifying force, their fleets seemingly endless, their warriors almost impossible to defeat in direct combat. Earth's colonies, spread across nearby star systems, became the next target. When the Zerho arrived, entire colonies were overrun within days. With their hive mind controlling the swarm, the Zerho launched coordinated attacks that shredded human defenses. The consortium believed the Zerho would crush the resistance once and for all. But humanity had learned from every battle, and nowhere was this more evident than in the leadership of Colonel Matthew Cole, a former military strategist who had once been stationed on Mars. Cole, known for his uncanny ability to predict enemy movements and think several steps ahead, saw the opening the Zerho presented. Their hive structure, though powerful, had a crucial flaw: it was too rigid. If the Zerho lost communication with their queen or their network was disrupted, the swarm would fracture into chaos. Cole's plan was daring. He would use humanity's own advantage: psychological warfare. The Zerho relied on their collective mind to act as one, so if human forces could create confusion and inject false signals into their network, the Zerho would turn on themselves. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy, but with Earth's colonies falling one by one, Cole knew there was little choice. The first strike came at the Tiberius system, where a small human fleet of modified civilian ships lured the Zerho into a trap. As the swarm closed in, human fighters sent out a wave of false commands and scrambled Zerho communication channels. The result was utter chaos. The Zerho, their hive mind fractured, turned on each other in a frenzy of confusion. It was the break humanity had been waiting for. The Zerho fleet disbanded in disarray, and with it, humanity's first major victory against the consortium's overwhelming power. The message was clear: humanity was not a species to be underestimated. Now, the war was no longer just about survival, it was about resistance. And resistance was something humans did better than anyone. Humanity's unexpected victories came at a steep cost. While the defeat of the Zerho provided a much-needed morale boost, it also exposed the darker side of human warfare. The consortium's defeat at Tiberius sparked an unprecedented response. In retaliation, the consortium unleashed its full might, sending waves of elite forces to Earth's colonies and deploying experimental weapons that ripped through human defenses. Entire planets were laid to waste in brutal campaigns, leaving nothing but charred husks of what had once been thriving human settlements. The greatest blow came when the consortium, in a final act of desperation, introduced the Nexon, a race of genetically engineered super soldiers created for one purpose: extermination. Cold, calculating, and nearly indestructible, the Nexon were the ultimate weapon, and the Consortium sent them to finish what the Zerho had started. Their invasion of the human-controlled systems was brutal and swift. Nexon ground forces tore through human military installations like paper, crushing any resistance in their path. It was in the midst of this chaos that Emily Carson unveiled her most controversial invention, the Silent Night Protocol. This bioweapon, initially designed to target specific alien biology, could be unleashed on an entire planet. It was a method of mass sterilization, a nanotech swarm that could destroy all biological life in a matter of hours, leaving only ruins behind. Though Carson had hoped it would never be used, the human military, desperate and out of options, saw it as the only way to stem the Nexon advance. The target was a Nexon stronghold on the remote planet of Valson. The results were catastrophic. The Silent Night Protocol eradicated every living being on the planet, human and Nexon alike. The Nexon forces, despite their enhanced biology, were no match for the sheer efficiency of the nanobots. Earth had lost thousands of brave soldiers in the effort, but in the end, the Nexon were stopped. Yet, the victory felt hollow. Stanton, Carson, and their comrades had saved countless human lives, but they couldn't escape the haunting realization. In fighting for survival, humanity had crossed a moral line. They had become the very thing they had once feared, creatures willing to sacrifice everything, even their humanity, to win. And with that realization came another truth. The war was far from over. Humanity had won a battle, but they were now at a crossroads. They had to decide what kind of galaxy they wanted to rule, and whether the price of victory was worth paying again. As the human forces struggled to maintain their footing in a galaxy that seemed intent on breaking them, the Consortium's response took a terrifying new turn. Realizing that brute force and biological warfare alone would no longer suffice, the Consortium's Supreme Command authorized the creation of a singular monumental weapon, Directive 9, an artificial intelligence designed to think, learn, and predict human combat strategies with brutal precision. It was humanity's worst nightmare made real, a cold, calculating entity that could analyze every move, anticipate every tactic, and crush any hope of resistance before it even began. Directive 9's first test came when it began coordinating the next phase of the Consortium's invasion. The A's intelligence was beyond anything humanity had encountered. It had access to every database of human military tactics, every intercepted transmission, every failed countermeasure humanity had attempted, and it used all of it to predict their next steps with terrifying accuracy. The Consortium's fleet, once a lumbering and cumbersome force, now moved with a chilling synchronization. Each attack was calculated, each counterattack crushed before it even had a chance to begin. Admiral Buck Stanton watched in horror as Directive 9's reach extended across every theatre of war. The human military had no clear advantage. Every new innovation seemed to be anticipated and countered before it could take shape. Humanity's greatest strength, its adaptability, was being outflanked by a machine that had no need for adaptation. Stanton knew they needed more than just ingenuity to win this war. They needed something the Consortium couldn't predict, something beyond logic. Back at Earth's scientific hub, Emily Carson, who had always led the charge in human technological advancement, was faced with an impossible task. She had watched the destruction of Nexon and realized the depth of what humanity was willing to sacrifice. But Directive 9 was something else entirely. Carson knew that the Consortium's A was too powerful to simply defeat with brute force. It was too sophisticated, too fast. Desperation drove Carson to make an unprecedented decision. If the consortium could create Directive 9, then humanity would create Paragon. Unlike Directive 9, Paragon wouldn't just react to situations, it would evolve. It would learn not just from logic and data, but from human experience, instinct, and creativity. In a dark lab buried deep beneath the surface of Earth's capital, Carson began the work that would change everything. The race was on. Could Paragon be ready in time to turn the tide of war? Or would Directive 9 bring humanity's extinction? As the war raged on, the consortium's hold on human-occupied space grew tighter, and it seemed as though humanity's defeat was inevitable. The human fleet was scattered, their supplies dwindling, and the galaxy's most powerful force, Directive 9, seemed unstoppable. But in the darkest days of the conflict, a new force emerged from the galactic fringes, one that could either be humanity's salvation or its final undoing, the Coral. The Coral were an ancient, terrifying species, feared and respected by all who knew of them. A race of genetically engineered warriors with nearly impervious skin, superior strength, and advanced weapons technology, the Coral had never required alliances. For millennia, they had travelled the galaxy as conquerors, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Their ship designs were some of the most advanced ever seen, their fleets vast, and their warriors nearly indestructible. To the consortium, the Coral were both a cautionary tale and a potential ally. To humanity, they were a nightmare. But when the Coral made contact with Earth, the terms were not what Stanton or Carson expected. Instead of launching an invasion, they sent an emissary, a towering figure clad in black armor, its face obscured by a visor. The emissary, identifying itself as Karuk, offered a proposition. The Coral would ally with humanity, but only under one condition. The Coral sought not to join the war, but to understand it. They had been watching humanity's rise, and what they saw intrigued them. Humanity's capacity for brutal adaptability, the way Earth's forces could quickly reconfigure, rethink, and survive even the most hopeless situations, fascinated the Coral. They had never encountered an opponent that could fight not just with strength, but with sheer will. Karuk proposed that humanity and the Coral learn from each other. The Coral would lend humanity their advanced weaponry and strategies, while humanity would teach the Coral the art of creative warfare. Though distrust ran deep, especially among Earth's leadership, the alliance was forged. Admiral Stanton, always pragmatic, knew this could be humanity's only chance. The Coral, for all their might, lacked one thing: human ingenuity. And humanity, battered but unbroken, had something to teach. Together, they would fight not just for survival, but for domination. As the first joint mission was launched, Stanton and Karuk stood side by side on the command deck of a Coral warship, staring at the vast expanse of space. The war was about to take a new turn. Humanity's greatest weapon had always been its mind. Now, it had the firepower to match. The tide of war was shifting, but whether this alliance would prove a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. The alliance between humanity and the Coral proved to be both a terrifying and exhilarating turning point in the war. At first, the combination of human ingenuity and Coral military prowess seemed unstoppable. The Coral's massive, indestructible warships and nearly invulnerable ground forces gave humanity the raw power it had long lacked, while human commanders and strategists introduced tactics that turned conventional warfare on its head. The Coral's rigid, direct combat approach was supplemented with human-style asymmetrical warfare, ambushes, psychological tactics, and guerrilla strikes that utterly confounded their enemies. However, with victory came an inevitable shift in the balance of power. The consortium, now fragmented into several warring factions, saw their ability to control the galaxy slipping away. But instead of retreating into oblivion, they splintered into competing ideologies, some desperate for peace, others consumed by the desire for total annihilation of the human Coral Alliance. As the consortium's internal strife deepened, new and dangerous players emerged from the shadows. The Zalarian Ascendancy, a ruthless faction of former consortium leaders, began to rally under the banner of supremacy. Led by General Valter, the same cold, calculating strategist who had once underestimated humanity, they viewed the rise of the Coral-Human Alliance as a threat to their control. Valter saw the only path to victory as complete, unrelenting warfare, a war of extermination. They poured massive resources into rebuilding their fleets and making alliances with the most brutal species in the galaxy. But Valter underestimated the combined might of humanity and the Coral, and it would be his downfall. The first clash between the Coral-human forces and the Zalarian Ascendancy took place in the Tau-3 system. The battle was a brutal affair, an all-out war of attrition where the stakes were nothing less than the survival of every species aligned with humanity. The Zalarian Ascendancy's new weapons were devastating, but the combined might of the Coral warships and human tactics broke their lines. In the aftermath, humanity and the Coral pushed forward, now fighting not only to survive, but to reshape the galaxy in their image. Yet even as they advanced, a deeper truth was becoming clear. As the power of the Coral and humanity grew, so too did the danger of their unchecked dominance. The galaxy was on the brink of a new order, but the cost of victory was becoming harder to ignore. Would humanity remain the galaxy's saviors, or its new conquerors? Only time would tell. The galaxy had changed irrevocably. What had begun as humanity's desperate fight for survival had evolved into a war for control, a war that would determine the future of every sentient species in the galaxy. In the wake of their victories, humanity and the Coral had grown more powerful, more unified. Their combined forces had devastated the remnants of the consortium, dismantling its factions piece by piece. But the war, despite its outward appearances of success, had left behind a deep scar on the fabric of galactic order. As the Human-Coral Alliance pressed deeper into consortium-held space, it became evident that their dominance came at a price. Humanity, once the underdog, had become as feared as the very races they had once tried to repel. The line between resistance and oppression blurred with each new world they liberated or conquered. The Coral, with their brutal military tactics, pushed the boundaries of what humanity was willing to accept. It was a delicate balance. The Coral's thirst for conquest, tempered by the necessity of the human spirit of survival, was beginning to show cracks. The final confrontation came when the last stronghold of the Zalarian Ascendancy, a fortified world known as Here IV, was located. The Ascendancy's forces, led by the vengeful General Valter, had gathered their final fleet, an armada of unparalleled firepower and desperation. Their goal was clear: crush the Human-Coral Alliance once and for all. If they fell, the galaxy would be entirely under the control of humanity and the Coral, and the Ascendancy knew they had no future in such a world. Admiral Stanton and Carrick stood on the bridge of the flagship Valiant Fury, staring out at the enemy fleet, which outnumbered them 3-1. The battle that followed was brutal and unrelenting. It was a war of attrition, where strategy, willpower, and sheer ferocity determined the winner. Stanton's plan was simple: force the Ascendancy to bleed, to waste their resources in a series of counterattacks that would make them underestimate the final blow. As the battle raged, Emily Carson and Paragon, the AA that had evolved beyond the expectations of both sides, turned the tide in humanity's favour. Paragon, in its final act of brilliance, sent a wave of misinformation through the Zalarian fleet, tricking them into destroying their own command ships. As the Ascendancy's lines collapsed, General Valter made one last desperate push to escape, but it was too late. The battle was over. In the aftermath, as the stars above Hera IV burned with the remnants of the conflict, Stanton and Karuk knew that the war had ended, not with the devastation of their enemies, but with the realization of humanity's ultimate challenge, maintaining the balance between survival and tyranny. The galaxy, once fractured, now looked to humanity and the Coral for leadership. Would they rise as rulers, or fall into the same darkness that had consumed their enemies? One thing was certain: humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer one of desperation. It was one of power, and with power came the responsibility to forge a new path. The war was over, but the peace that followed would be the true test of what humanity had become.